So now we have this, and we just have this final animation pose result node and our character is standing in the T pose, right? So now we have to have a state machine as I described in the previous video before we ended that video. So I'm going to go ahead and add a state machine for myself. I'll say state machine, and it says add new state machine, exactly what we want, right? And then I'll connect this first, right? And then I'll give it a name. I'll just say walk underscore run. This will be a state machine that will determine when to walk and when to run, and when to go into idle and when to go into walk and when to run. And that will also implement how we blend all of these things together in a beautiful way, so that it looks seamless, right? So now when I compile this right away, it'll start doing this. It'll implement it. All these little particles moving from walk run to the final animation pose node, determining that there is a connection between these two nodes. At the same time, it also has a warning. It says there was no entry state connection walk and run. That's because we have not added any animations in it yet. So I'm going to double click and let's start adding some things. Let's start adding a few things inside here. Okay, also if you note at the top of this, you have these breadcrumbs. So I can actually click on any of these. So if I want, this is the soldier anim BP, that's the main blueprint. And now this is the animation blueprint graph, or the anim graph. And inside that, we have created a new walk and run state machine, not a state, but a state machine. And the states are created inside the state machine. When I double click that, you can see this breadcrumb has been updated with a walk and run that's open right now. Okay, so now you have this entry node, and from here we can go on to different state. Okay, so since this is walk and run, so we'll say from entry at the offset, I want this guy to go over to idle. So I want to create a state, and I'll call this, okay, I'll call this state idle. Idle, there you go. And from here, I want to create another state from where it can go over to either walk or run. Okay, so walk underscore run is what it's called. And now you can see that it enters into this state machine. It goes on to idle and then goes on to walk and run. Now I also want the character to stop running, and if you want to come back to idle, then I want this state to come back to an idle state, the walk and run state. So I'll drag another arrow and reconnect it back there. So it says, okay, now this indicates that, okay, there's a transition from idle to walk and run, and an arrow here with this symbol below that indicates that there's a transition back to walk and run, back to idle from walk and run. So from the moment you enter the state machine, you can enter the idle state and it'll be in idle, and then you start pressing some keys or doing something, it starts walking and running. And from there, you stop pressing the keys and you want the character to stop and stay in an idle position. It comes back here, and that's how this is all set. That's how this is all set up. Now, if I double click on idle, and it will take me inside the idle state. So now we can see that breadcrumbs, conveniently notified here. So you have the anim blueprint, then you have the anim graph, then you have the walk and run state. Okay, then you have the walk and run state machine. Then you inside that you have the idle state. Okay, and of course I can go back here, I can double click it, I can also go back into walk and run, doesn't matter. But I come back here, I want to first set up the idle state before I get on to the next state. Okay, so we'll quickly set up this animation idle state, and then we'll move on and we'll go on to something else. So I'm going to bring in the idle aiming, and I'm going to drop it here. Okay, and then I'll connect these two, and then I'll click compile, and then you can see that this guy is now from a T pose, he is moved on to an idle state, an idle aiming state. Okay, so now you can see that this thing is going to keep on playing in a loop. So when I come back here, and this is a little bit more complicated because this involves your input bindings and all that to figure out where the character is running and what speed he is running in, and that will require quite a lot of scripts. And if I click on this, then you also have to set some of these transition settings and so on, but we won't be doing that right now. But for now, we will pause this. We'll pause this at the idle state. I'm going to close this, or I'm going to keep that open. The next thing we're going to need is we're going to need some blend spaces, and blend spaces is more like a two-dimensional graph where you have a lot of animation placed in different points in the graph, and that will determine the direction that the character has to move in and with what speed. Okay, so it's actually very difficult to explain it in theory, but it's better that when I start working on blend spaces, you can easily follow along. So out here, I'll be creating a blend space. Okay, so for the blend space, I'm going to right click, I'm going to go over to animation, and I'm going to select the blend space, not 1D, but blend space. And I'll call this, I'll again take up the soldier skeleton, and I'll rename this to walk underscore run underscore blend space. Or I don't need walk underscore, I think I'm content with walk run underscore blend space, too many underscores there. Now when I open this up, if you're seeing this for the first time, it's okay. It might look a little complicated, but it's quite simple actually. So down here, this is the most important part of this whole editor, the blend space editor, where you have this grid, and it's a graph that I spoke about. It's a two-dimensional graph. This is the y-axis and this is the x-axis, and these can be different things. These can be parameterized as whatever you want. You can have this as direction, have this as speed, or have this as velocity and something else. Depends on how you want to set it up. So this is a graph, which will control both the parameters, the direction. Let's say we have direction here and we have speed here. So if I move this little thing around, so this is a preview value marker. So when I move this thing around, and if you have animation set up in this graph, then it's going to exactly take that value on the graph at that particular point. So let's say this is direction, and this is 0 to 100, this is speed 0 to 100, and this would be just 25, 50, 75. So this is 75 direction, and this is 75 speed, right? So this will accordingly calculate in which direction the character has to move in and with what speed the character has to move in. Now, if you bring this down all the way to 0, which means that there is no direction, there is no speed, and the character is completely idle, right? So now we're going to set up this graph, and now we also have this asset browser like you saw in this animation blueprint, where you can drag and drop your asset animations from the asset browser and do things with them. And the same thing, we can drag and drop animations into this graph, but before we do that, we have to set it up. And this is the asset details panel, and you also conveniently have the skeleton tree. So if you want to pick up a specific skeleton or specific bone in the skeleton and manipulate that, then you can do that. But for the most part in this video, we're going to be looking at the asset details, where we'll be setting up the horizontal axis and the vertical axis first, and then we'll go on to adding animations and manipulating them in the blend space, the 2D blend space. So the first thing is, we'll first name the horizontal and the vertical axes. For the horizontal axis, I'm going to name it direction because I want the direction to be there. When I hit enter, you can see the direction the none has been replaced with direction. And the same thing we do for vertical axis. We want speed on the vertical axis. So X has direction and Y has speed. This is a preview marker. This is origin. And whatever you put inside, it's going to manipulate based on whichever point of the graph it is in, and it's going to accordingly change the behavior of the character. Very handy, very simple, and very powerful. Okay, so there's one thing that I want to set up, the minimum and the maximum axis values for both of these axes. Let's look at the one for direction. So let's take a look at speed. So if I go to third person character, and if I look at the character movement, and if I look at the maximum speed, maybe max walk speed is 600. So if I just type in speed, you can see a bunch of things that there for speed. So you can see that pretty much everything is maxed out to 600. So you have max walk speed as 600. The max walk speed crouched obviously is 300. That makes sense. And then the max swim speed is 300 because people can walk faster than swim. I don't know. And then you have the max fly speed as 600 and the max custom movement speed as 600 as well. So nothing is actually crossing 600. So we'll use the same amount, or we'll use the same value for setting up our speed axis here. So the minimum axis value would be 0 and the maximum would be 600. So once you set that up as 600, you can see that this thing has changed, and also this marker has moved down a bit. And then for the horizontal axis, I want him to rotate 360 degrees. There's no restriction in how he's going to rotate because he can look around 360 degrees around him, right? So for the direction, I'm going to say the minimum axis value would be -180. and the maximum access value would be 180, right? So there you go. And now you can also see that this thing has accordingly moved itself. And also the markers not only has the name changed from none to direction and speed respectively, but they also have the minimum and the maximum values noted down on the graph as -180 to 180 for direction and 0 to 600 for speed. Excellent. Okay, so figure out what kind of animations fit into what graph. So just to give you a simple primer, so if I just drag and drop something right in the center, and you can see that he's walking, okay? And of course, it doesn't matter because there's no blend space right now. And no matter where you move this preview marker, he's still going to be walking around anyways. So if I hold control, it's going to give me the speed as well as the direction. And if I let go of control, then it's just going to be giving me the speed. Okay, it's going to give me a lot more details than what I am walking with. So right now I'm using walk underscore crouching underscore forward in place. And if I let it go, it's just going to give me the direction and the speed. Okay. And so this is how it works. You drag and drop animations onto the different intersection points in this grid, and then you manipulate it using this and some of the values as well. So we'll learn that. So the first thing is I'll delete this. I let it go back to the T-pose. Now this has about, let's say, this has about 1, 2, 3, 4. This is about 4 by 4. That's 16. Okay, that's 60. That's 4 by 4. That's got 16 grids in here, and it's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 3. So that is 15. Okay, so that's 15 animations. So this is a grid space or the blend space graph where we're gonna place different animations. So right in the center, we're gonna be placing walk in place. Okay, so we're gonna be placing walk in place here, and then we're gonna be placing walk left in place out here. So these are all the names of the animations from the asset browser. So you're gonna be placing all of these animations in the different vertices as given by this particular graph. So of course, if you want to figure out how you want him to go around, but once we're done with that, I'll explain how actually we come across to this. So the first thing is I'm going to find out this particular animation, walk underscore in place. Okay, I'm going to find that and walk underscore in place. So let me see if I can find it.